You ever feel like you're walking through life with blinders on? Like,
Yeah.
there's this whole world of fascinating details we're missing because our brains are just on autopilot. That's kind of the feeling I got when I started diving into this research on sharpening observation skills.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? We're bombarded with information constantly, but the very act of processing all that data can make us less observant of the world right in front of us.
Exactly. It's almost like we're so busy looking at things we forget to truly see them. So this deep dive is all about rewiring our brains a bit, becoming more intentional about how and what we observe.
The source material really dives into the mechanics of how our brains filter information. You see, our brains are wired to prioritize survival, so they're constantly scanning for threats and patterns. Anything that doesn't fit that immediate need for survival often gets relegated to the background noise.
That makes total sense. I mean, if our ancestors were constantly stopping to admire every pretty flower, they probably wouldn't have lasted very long against a saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly. But the intriguing part is that this filtering system, while essential, also limits our potential for deeper observation. Think about it this way. Ever walked into a room and completely missed something obvious, like a brightly colored package on the table?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
I blame it on being busy-brained, but it sounds like my brain is just being efficient in a prehistoric sort of way. So how do we break free from these ancient survival filters and actually become more observant?
Well, the source material highlights a key concept: neuroplasticity. It's the idea that our brains aren't fixed. They're constantly adapting and rewiring themselves based on our experiences.
So even though we evolved to tune out non-essential details, we can actually train our brains to pay attention to those things again.
Absolutely. And that's the exciting part. Observation is a skill, not some innate talent. Anyone can learn to become more observant. It's like building a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets.
Okay, I'm already feeling more empowered. So where do we start this mental workout? Give me the first rep in Observation 101.
The source material suggests starting with something deceptively simple: mindful walking. I know it sounds a little new agey, but hear me out.
Right, I'm all ears. Though technically, shouldn't I be using all my senses if we're talking about observation?
That's exactly the point. Most of the time when we walk, we're on autopilot. We're thinking about our to-do list, replaying conversations. Basically anything but the actual experience of walking. Mindful walking flips that script.
So instead of just putting one foot in front of the other, I'm actually paying attention to the sensation of my feet hitting the pavement, the sounds around me, maybe even the scent of freshly cut grass.
Exactly. It's about engaging all your senses, becoming truly present in the moment. And that presence is the foundation for heightened observation. Because when you're truly present, you start to notice the details that most people miss.
I could already see how that would be useful. Instead of just walking down the street and seeing buildings, I might actually start to notice the architectural details, the way the light reflects off the windows, maybe even a tiny bird's nest tucked away on a ledge.
Precisely. And by focusing on your senses, you're also expanding your sensory range. You might start to pick up on subtle variations in color that you never noticed before, or distinguish between the different birds singing in a nearby tree.
It's like our senses are these incredible tools we've been taking for granted. And mindful walking is the instruction manual we never knew we needed.
It really is. And what's fascinating is that this mindful sensory engagement can be applied to more than just walking. Think about your daily routines. How much of it is spent on autopilot?
Oh my gosh, practically all of it. Especially in the mornings. I'm basically a zombie until I've had my coffee.
We've all been there. But imagine if you applied that same mindful awareness to, say, your morning coffee routine. Instead of just gulping it down, you actually savor the aroma. Notice the subtle variations in flavor. Maybe even pay attention to the warmth of the mug in your hand.
You're turning my mundane morning routine into a sensory symphony. I never thought about it that way, but I can see how that kind of heightened awareness could translate to other areas of life. Speaking of which, the source mentions something about memory drills to further sharpen observation skills. That sounds a bit more like a mental workout than a relaxing walk in the park.
Right. So mindful walking is like warming up those observation muscles. Now we're going to add some weights. These memory drills are all about training your brain to notice and retain information more effectively.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of mental weightlifting are we talking about here?
One fascinating exercise is called What's Out of Place. It's all about training your brain to spot subtle anomalies, things that just don't quite belong.
Like a coffee mug sitting on a bookshelf instead of in the kitchen? Or someone wearing mismatched socks?
Those are good examples. But to really challenge your observation skills, the source suggests looking at more complex visual puzzles. Imagine a picture of a bustling street scene. Lots of people, cars, buildings. Your task is to find the one element that's been subtly altered, something that's out of place in that environment.
That sounds tricky. What kind of things should I be looking for?
It could be anything. A car facing the wrong direction, a street sign with the wrong letters, even a person wearing clothes that don't match the season. The key is to really scrutinize the image, break it down into sections, and look for anything that deviates from the expected pattern.
It's like becoming a visual detective. I imagine this exercise would be great for anyone working in fields, where attention to detail is crucial, like forensic scientists or air traffic controllers.
Absolutely. But the benefits extend far beyond specific professions. These types of exercises enhance your pattern recognition abilities, boost your memory, and even strengthen your ability to focus for extended periods, and that translates to pretty much any area of life.
I'm starting to realize that observation isn't just about seeing. It's about processing information effectively. It's like the difference between glancing at a book and actually reading it.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of reading, remember how we talked about how our brains filter information based on survival needs? Well, there's another powerful tool that can override those filters and force us to pay attention. Curiosity.
You mean that insatiable urge to know more, to understand why things are the way they are?
Exactly. Curiosity is the fuel that drives effective observation. When you're curious about something, you're naturally more inclined to pay attention to it, to seek out more information, to really dig beneath the surface.
I could definitely relate to that. When I'm researching a topic for a podcast, I find myself noticing things I never would have paid attention to before. Suddenly, articles, conversations, even random observations on the street all seem relevant.
That's a perfect example of how curiosity can unlock a whole new level of awareness. It's like you've activated a mental searchlight, highlighting the connections and patterns that were always there, but hidden in plain sight.
So it's not just about passively observing. It's about actively engaging with the world around us, asking questions, seeking out answers.
And that active engagement leads to deeper understanding, more meaningful connections, and even unexpected discoveries.
You know, that reminds me of something. A few months ago, I was walking through my neighborhood, and I noticed this odd pattern of cracks in the sidewalk.
What'd you do? Just keep walking.
At first, I almost did. But then something sparked my curiosity. I started wondering how the cracks had formed, if there was some underlying reason for the pattern. I ended up doing a little research. And it turns out it had to do with the type of soil beneath the sidewalk and how it had shifted over time. It was actually pretty fascinating.
That's a great example of how a simple observation fueled by curiosity can lead to unexpected insights. You went from passively noticing something to actively seeking understanding.
And that's the beauty of this whole sharpening your senses thing. It's not just about becoming a better observer, it's about becoming a more engaged and curious participant in the world around us.
Absolutely. And that engagement can have a profound impact on our relationships as well, because observation isn't just about noticing cracks in sidewalks or spotting hidden objects in a picture. It's also about understanding people.
You're talking about reading body language, understanding facial expressions, picking up on those subtle cues that reveal what someone is really feeling, even if they're not saying it out loud.
Exactly. The source material dives into the fascinating world of nonverbal communication, how we use our bodies and faces to convey emotions, intentions, even hidden thoughts.
Okay, I'm intrigued. This is starting to sound a bit like mind reading. Give me an example of how these nonverbal cues work in real life.
Imagine you're having a conversation with someone, and they're telling you about a recent success. They're smiling, their tone is upbeat, but you notice their shoulders are slightly slumped, and their gaze keeps dropping to the floor.
That's a mismatch between their words and their body language. It's like their body is telling a different story.
Exactly. And by paying attention to those nonverbal cues, you're getting a more complete picture of what's going on. Maybe they're downplaying their success out of modesty, or maybe there's something else weighing on their mind.
So it's like having access to a secret language, one that reveals the emotions beneath the surface.
It's more like learning to read between the lines. And the more attuned you are to these nonverbal signals, the better you'll become at understanding the nuances of human communication.
This is all starting to make so much sense. But I have to admit, sometimes I feel like I'm so focused on trying to read people's body language that I forget to actually listen to what they're saying. It's like I'm so busy analyzing their every twitch and gesture that I miss the actual message.
That's a valid point. It's important to find a balance between observing nonverbal cues and actively listening to what someone is saying. In fact, the source emphasizes that active listening is just as crucial as nonverbal observation when it comes to understanding people
So it's not just about what they're saying, but how they're saying it.
Exactly. Active listening involves paying attention not just to the words, but also to the tone of voice, the volume, the pauses, even the way someone breathes. It's about listening with your whole being, not just your ears.
That's a powerful image, and I can see how it would lead to a much deeper level of understanding.
It's about going beyond the surface, tuning into the subtext, the unspoken emotions beneath the words.
I'm starting to realize that truly effective communication is like a dance between observation and listening. We need both to fully understand the other person.
And that dance becomes even more intricate when you factor in another layer of observation: the context of the situation, the environment, the social dynamics, even the time of day can all influence how we communicate and how our messages are received.
Wow, it's like we're peeling back layers of an onion here, revealing more and more complexity with each observation.
And that complexity is what makes human interaction so fascinating. But it can also be overwhelming.
So how do we avoid information overload? Is there a way to filter all these observations and extract the most meaningful insights?
That's where critical thinking comes in. It's about asking yourself those why questions. Why is this person behaving this way? What's the context? What's the most likely interpretation of this information?
It's like being a detective, gathering clues and piecing together the puzzle of human behavior.
Exactly. And the more you practice this type of critical observation, the better you'll become at separating signal from noise, discerning patterns, and understanding the motivations behind people's actions.
I'm starting to see how all these observation techniques, from mindful walking to memory drills to analyzing nonverbal cues, they all build upon each other, creating a more holistic and nuanced understanding of the world.
And that understanding can have a profound impact, not just on our relationships, but on our ability to solve problems and even unlock creative potential.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about this connection between observation and creativity.
Well, think about it this way. Every creative breakthrough, every innovative solution starts with an observation. Someone notices something unexpected, a pattern that others have missed, a connection that sparks a new idea.
So observation is the seed of creativity.
In many ways, yes, because when you're attuned to the details, when you're actively seeking out new information and making connections, you're essentially priming your brain for creative insights.
That makes sense. It's like the more you observe,
Yeah.
the more raw material you have to work with, the more possibilities you can envision.
And the source highlights some fascinating examples of how observation has fueled creativity throughout history. Think about artists who find inspiration in the intricate patterns of nature, or musicians who translate the sounds of their environment into beautiful melodies.
Or writers who observe human behavior and transform those insights into compelling characters and stories.
Exactly. Observation is the lifeblood of creativity. And the more we cultivate our observation skills, the more we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities.
This is all incredibly inspiring, but I'm also wondering, are there any downsides to being highly observant? Could it be overwhelming to be constantly taking in so much information?
It's a valid concern. And the source does acknowledge that there's a fine line between heightened observation and sensory overload. That's why it's important to find a balance, to know when to tune in and when to tune out.
So it's not about becoming some kind of hyper-aware surveillance camera, constantly scanning for every minute detail.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with your observation, choosing what to focus on, and knowing when to take a break and let your mind wander freely.
That makes sense. It's about finding that sweet spot between awareness and overwhelm.
And that sweet spot is different for everyone. The key is to experiment with different techniques. Find what works best for you.